All right, and we're rolling. Everything okay?
Yeah, everything's okay.
Awesome. All right, so yeah, today we've got on Casey, someone I know for a long time. Thanks so much, Casey, for coming on. First real story I want to tell actually of how my first memory of you was grade 8. You guys were along corridor, and there was a group of, I think it was you, Hunter, a couple other people on Rubik's Cubes. And I myself knew how to cube a little bit, so that I walk by and I see someone just absolutely going at it. And I was like, who is this guy? And then I think that's my first interaction. I still think of you guys sometimes because we have a Rubik's Cube in the office here that I just solve it like once a day. I'm nowhere near as fast as I used to be, but that's the first time I met you. And ever since then, I've always, known you to be a super stand-up guy. And now you've got a lot of stuff going for yourself, and really happy to have you on. And I'll let you kind of do your own intro. But thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, well, I like solving problems. I remember that back in grade 8, there were only like 3 of us that knew how to solve the Rubik's Cube, and we'd just be in the hallway making all these sounds with our cubes. This is before all the speed cubing. I don't think speed cubing was even a thing back then in 2000.
No, it wasn't, no.
Wow, 2008? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a cube with me right now, but I do solve it now and then, and it surprises me. My muscle memory is still there. I'm able to solve it
Exactly, it's
more or
crazy.
less the same
Yeah.
speed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple
about
of the
myself,
algorithms I don't remember as much, but yeah. But it is what it is.
I'm not gonna lie, I've gone back and tried to relearn some of the algorithms, but I think my 12-year-old brain was much more adaptable to that kind of learning as compared to like my late 20s brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah,
So
so,
more about myself.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no thanks. I think there's just a little bit of a lag, but that's fine. I'll give a little bit of space as we talk here. But myself, born and raised in Vancouver, Shai and I went to high school together, and it's been actually a long time since we met. And over the last few years, we'd bump into each other here and there. I know that you were one of the few from high school that started your own business, and it's always been super inspiring to me. So when you reached out to me a few weeks ago asking if I wanted to be on this podcast, I was like, oh yeah, it'd be a great place for you and I to reconnect, and also for me to share with your audience that will be growing with this podcast series a bit more about career development. I'm a career coach and a life coach, and I help specifically accounting and finance professionals develop in their careers. And I'm at a point right now where I'm really learning how to listen better and adapt to the needs of my audience, of my clients, and the big problems that I help them solve. So I'm thinking back at this Rubik's Cube is corporate professionals, and this is a route a little bit different than you took, Ashaya, is you get sucked into this linear path of get your education, find a job, find a new job, get paid more, and so on. And there's a very structured way to quote unquote win the game, which is make your way to the top of the corporate ladder. And specifically in the accounting and finance industry, and this is the industry that I came from before becoming a coach, I realized that it was actually quite difficult to move away from this path and start creating something for yourself. And specifically for me, Ashaya, it was honestly seeing people like yourself run businesses and stay committed to businesses where I always thought, wow, it would be pretty cool if I had my own business at some point. And it was always at some point. Maybe I needed more experience in the field. Maybe I needed more money saved up. Maybe I needed more awards. There's always this thinking of, well, I could wait. I need more success before I could start something. And it wasn't until the pandemic, actually, where I realized that thinking wasn't getting me anywhere. And I actually worked with a coach and mentors and teachers, and I started relying more on my intuition to make decisions and receiving help. So that's when career coaching came into my awareness. I didn't know what career coaches were 3 years ago, but I surely knew that I was struggling with my career. I had a professional designation in accounting. I had a good job, had decent pay, really good career trajectories ahead, but I just didn't enjoy waking up in the morning to go to work. And when the pandemic came around, it really started to magnify these problems. When all the good things about work, which were being able to socialize in the office, go to events, share space with people, learn together, all got taken away, and I was at home in my basement at my parents' house.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many of you could relate. The pandemic, it might seem like ages ago, like literally it was earlier this January that we still had lockdowns in Vancouver with Omicron. And it feels like years have passed since January, and we've been able to live more freely and more openly. Unfortunately, some people may still be feeling stuck, feeling restricted. And that's how I felt during that early part of the pandemic. And when I did consider making a career change for myself, I was like, I have no idea what I want, but I know what I don't want. I don't want to be behind my desk for the rest of my career, working 40 to 50 hours a week and not having time to spend with my family. And I understand that that's what many of our paths will lead to, and that we do need to work hard and invest into ourselves, our education, our relationships. And this ticking time bomb of this eventually start my own business, I thought Ashaya was going to be in my late 30s. Yeah. But when I was working with my coach and I kept on getting asked the question, Casey, what is it that you really want? Like, what's actually holding you back? I said, I'm just scared of failing. So what did I do? I ended up quitting my job, saying I got to figure out if I will fail. Because when else have I failed in my life? And fallen down and stayed down. I need to give myself this shot. And in that same time frame, I applied to go back to school to get some coach training, some education. That's what I felt I needed at the time to build that confidence. And I had this plan. I'll become a life coach. I'll learn how to coach on the side, and I'll be on my path to building a business during the first year of the pandemic. And my mom said, Casey, what are you doing? Why are you leaving your job? Like, you have a good, steady job. You work so hard to get there. And for those that studied business or accounting or finance, the sunk cost fallacy is the idea that when you put time into something, that you have to follow that. The sunk cost is like, oh, but actually, I put my time into that, but now I'm a new person. I have other ideas. It doesn't mean I have to continue to follow that path. Right?
Right.
So when I got to that point and decided to leave my job and give my resignation, my mom was like, what are you doing? It's ridiculous. She didn't use those words, but that's very much the tone.
Yeah,
and my dad said,
moms,
well,
right?
do what makes you happy. Yes. My dad said, Casey, just do what makes you happy. And I'm like, okay, wow. I did not expect that. So I quit my job, and 5 days later, this is in between giving my notice and having my 2 weeks notice, the partners of my firm gave me a call and said, Casey, we know you quit, but we have an opportunity for you to coach and train all of our junior staff that are going to be joining the firm, about 100 of them, fully remote during a pandemic. They just came out of university. They didn't even have a graduation. And the job is yours if you want it.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, interesting. I was super stoked, and everyone knows that I quit, and I want to start my own business. But when I really got to the core of it, you think of, why do I want to start a business? Like, what really drives me? Well, the fact is, I didn't like being behind a desk all the time, and I really wanted to be teaching. I really wanted to be helping, empowering, and inspiring people. And the two paths that I had was create something from scratch, which was my option A, which I thought was the best plan. And option B is, here's 100 individuals coming out of university, entering the workforce for the very first time during a global pandemic, working from home, likely at home, right? And when I really sat with that opportunity, it took about a week to think about it, I realized that I was there to serve. There's 100 students, early career professionals that could use my support. So I told myself, I'm going to keep my entrepreneurial hat on. I'm going to go in and pretend that I'm the entrepreneur, I'm a contractor, and I'm going to take a 1-year contract with this big company, one of the big four accounting firms, to coach and to learn alongside while getting my certificate, to offer value to these staff. I call them staff or students because they're studying at the same time while working.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And in a year, I'll reassess. Right. And in that year, I had probably the most entrepreneurial experience of my career. I started different systems within the company for coaching, for collaboration, for leadership. I started a mental health employee resource group as well, because I had this mindset, this entrepreneurial mindset within an organizational system. And as I was going through the motions, I started to understand the politics. I started to understand where the decision makers were and realized that I still have this dream to have my own business. And by the time I finished that year, which was a very, very fulfilling job, it was the dream job, I would say, a very great role for me to learn my own skills, but also help others manage stress, manage burnout, manage anxiety, build their careers. But at the end of that year, I realized that I still have this goal to be an entrepreneur, and made a decision to quit again. And this time around, I even had this conversation with my manager. She asked, Casey, is there anything that we could do to have you stay? And I said, honestly, no. Because what I want to do is something that I can only do for myself. And the vision that I have is to build a business from scratch. I have no customers right now. But to build a business by helping people, do it fully remote. And by this time next year, I want to be living abroad with my girlfriend, who's now my fiance. And I was shaking because I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. But I had this vision, a strong conviction to make that happen, despite the failures that I'm going to have to go through, to really embrace this uncertainty of entrepreneurship. And today, I'll end this long introduction with this point is I've been able to run this business for the last year. It's profitable. I've actually earned more money in this new business than I have in my previous role's salary. And I'm living in Costa Rica right now, traveling with my fiance. And I don't share that to brag, but I share that to show that there is a path outside of the typical career paths that oftentimes our parents gently or forcefully push us towards or guide us towards. And most of our mentors are friends. And that was for me, like, Casey, what are you doing quitting your corporate job? I'm like, well, it's just not for me. Could be for someone else, but it's not for me. And now that I've taken this other path, I get really excited. It feels like I just finished preschool of entrepreneurship and I'm going into grade 1 now. There's so much more to learn. And I'm in a path now where I could help others find their paths while continuing to develop my own skills and impact. So I know it's a long-winded introduction here, Ashaya, so I'll give you back the mic here if you have any questions or follow-up comments.
That's a great intro, Casey. I think you told the story, you told it eloquently. Thank you so much for that intro. There's a couple of things that I really resonated with. First of all is that thing of saying, I'll start later. I hear that a lot, and not just in finance and accounting, but also in tech, in other sectors too. I hear that a lot. Is that something that you've had to coach some people against, and some people have started their own businesses?
Every day. I'll put it off later. It's something that I want to do later. It's something that I could do later. We call that procrastination, or overthinking, or talking with your mouth, not with your actions. And honestly, I'll have to put it this way, but the pandemic for 2020, 2021, and even 2022, our excuse has been, I'll do it after the pandemic. We haven't had a big celebration across the world saying, oh, we beat the pandemic, we're here. There isn't that one finish line. And I'm finding that the interconnectedness of our ability to make decisions and anxiety about the future or uncertainty it's constantly changing. We go through the pandemic, and then now we're going through a recession. There's always something going on in the world that's going to be shaking us up. And the saying of I'll wait till later is a cop-out. It's an excuse to procrastinate on progressing forward in your life or progressing forward in your career. And I say this because that was my experience. I was waiting for something to change in the external environment, right?
Sometimes when we wait on external factors, it never comes. So I think the fact that you took that leap of faith as early as you could, I think mad props to you for that. I think that's what more people really should be doing. I know personally for me, I wanted to start something, and I was in that mindset of maybe it's going to be later, maybe when I learn more skills, but I had the opportunity to do so earlier, and I'm very glad that I took that because it's been very fulfilling.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, the wait for later is something that I still talk about. But the way that I talk about the future now is about creating that future and learning patience as well, because patience is also very important. I wanted to be a coach 2 years ago and have my own business 2 years ago. I ended up not doing that. It came a year later. But in the grand scheme of things, 1 year in our entire lives is a small amount of time. What I typically do coach people on is being able to be action oriented. And the ideas that we have, some of them could be brilliant ideas, progressive ideas that will move us forward. Other ideas could be limiting ideas that hold us back from moving and progressing in our lives. So as a coach, a large part of my responsibility to my clients is to help them invest into ideas and thoughts and aspirations that are going to help them move forward in their careers and lives, and to let go of the ideas and the beliefs that hold them back from progressing. And one of those ideas that hold us back oftentimes is this thought of that we're not good enough. We're not ready. We are not enough as people to deserve X result. For my clients, it's typically a new job or starting a business, or when I get into the more life coaching subjects with my clients, it's I don't deserve this relationship. I don't deserve to be healthy. And at the core, it comes down to these inner barriers that we hold within ourselves that likely came from early childhood or experiences from our past that we haven't yet acknowledged are holding us back. So the type of coaching that I do is very deep. It's not just give me a resume, I'll help you find a job. It's, well, what is it that you're looking for to create in your life, and when, and what steps are you currently taking today to get you closer to that? And if you want to take bigger steps together, we could do that. And you don't need to do it alone, because we never need to do anything alone. We're social beings. We're here to collaborate and help each other.
Exactly. I think I want to talk to one thing that you alluded to before, which is finding fulfillment in your work. Because there are people who will work, 40 hours, 9 to 5, and be really dreading it. And then you have some people who are really involved with their work, and they can work, more, maybe like 70, 80 hours a week and still find fulfillment. What do you really think is the difference between these two sets of people?
Yeah. I think the biggest difference is our upbringing and personality, right? Depending on our upbringings and personality being a blend of our nature and our nurture, will shape our values. And our values, I believe our values they're developed from our experiences and our personalities. And when we are living in alignment with our values, I'll give you an example. One of my values is to be of service to others, to give, to add value for others. I found that in my old job as an accountant, I didn't exactly feel that direct link. So every day when I showed up at work, when I was crunching numbers on my computer, I felt like I have more to give because I valued giving. I had more to give, but I was getting held back by my current position. So I was at the point of not entirely dreading the job that I was doing, but I wasn't being fulfilled by the work that I was doing. However, there are people that do not have the same value. They actually value being able to get things done or be able to focus on delivering a task. And that kind of work is exactly aligned with what they enjoy and what gives them fulfillment. So the difference between those that work their 9-to-5 jobs and do not enjoy what they're doing and those that love what they're doing and they could work all these hours, I think it really comes down to what they value. I love what I do, but I rarely work more than 40 hours a week because I value my time with my friends, my family. I'm doing things that I enjoy. Right? And when I'm at work, I'm at work. I focus. And I really do enjoy that time. And yes, there will be times where I need to spend a bit more time working in a season, in a week, to get caught up or to get ahead. But it comes down to, for myself at least, it was finding that I really do value balance as well. So I like giving and helping, but I don't need to help everyone in the world. I need to help and support my clients, the ones that are contracted to work with me, that want to work with me, to be fully present with them at that time. And outside of work, I'm able to find enjoyment in other ways as well. I find as well my path that I chose in building my own business and following something that I am truly passionate about is not a path for everyone. Some people may have their work life fully separate from their personal life and, go to work to get paid so that they could fund their leisure activities. Other people I know really enjoy work and value creation and earning wealth is what they value. So they're more than happy to spend 60, 70 hours a week revolving around the value of hard work. And I think the challenge really is when we don't fully understand our values, we may get misguided in a direction, whether that's in our careers, our relationships, the way that we spend our time or don't spend our time. And we become in misalignment with our values. There's actually conflict. And that's where unfulfillment lives. That's where stress lives. When we're living in a way where we don't feel like we can be at our best. And hey, during the pandemic, I think many of us felt that. We got a taste of it, which caused a lot of us to start reconsidering. Is what I'm doing actually what I want to be doing right now? Surely that was for me.
And so people have this deliberation of what their values are. What are some strategies that people you've seen use to figure out and really get to the root of what their personal values might be? Is writing it down, maybe talking it over with someone, seeking coaching such as something you offer? Is that a way to discover your values, or what are some other ways?
Yeah, I think the number one key or the ingredient to understanding and better understanding our values is through self-reflection, right? Building our self-awareness. Self-awareness is really our ability to see ourselves from a third person, observing perspective, to see beneath the surface of our behaviors, like our very tangible behaviors, to understand our beliefs, to understand our values, to understand at the core who we are. And yes, it may sound fluffy, but I'll get more specific here. Specific ways where I've seen people exercise the discovery of their values could be through coaching, like having a conversation with a coach or a therapist or even a mentor, a teacher, a good friend, having a conversation of what do you value? What do you enjoy in life? What could you not live without in your life? What's missing in your life? That's also a really good indicator of our values. Is what's missing? What are you not receiving? Or what do you not have in your life right now that you wish you had more of? For me, during the pandemic, it was definitely social connection. I love being around people. I love sharing space and meals and activities with people. And it was really challenging to have to only be with 6 people. And in the discovery of our values, I think there's many different tools that people can go about doing that. So like I said, talking and communicating. Some people will read about how to find your values. You read self-help books. You could read autobiographies. Writing as well is something that I've really leveraged a lot of over the last 4 or 5 years, is actually getting a physical journal and just writing. Free flowing, getting my thoughts. I like to think of thoughts. Yeah, I mean, our thoughts are like scribbles. Like there's a bunch of scribbles that like we'll have like nearly 100,000 thoughts in a day, upwards. And when we start to journal and focus on one thing at a time, we could actually see what's happening. And we can't write as fast as we think. So we start to slow down our thinking, and we could become clearer and clearer on what it is that we're contemplating or what we're deliberating. And as well, when it comes to values, it's reflecting and taking note of how we feel in a given moment. How we feel in a given moment. And there's moments in our lives where we may feel misaligned, where we're in a social situation, for example, that you said yes to, but you kind of don't want to be there. And those moments, we might not have a clear picture right away of what's going on inside. But when we start to reflect and understand, oh, actually, which one of my values were in conflict? Right? Which one of my values were in conflict in those moments? I'll give an example. Like, for example, back in high school, hanging out with the wrong crowd. Say you got sucked into a crowd where, you know, other students that are cheating or stealing. And, you know, for me, being around that kind of behavior always felt a bit off. And it's because I value respect. I value fairness. I value equity. I do not value theft or rude behavior. Right. So those are examples of ways that we can better connect with our values. And I think of values and interests, they kind of weave together. Right. They weave together. We exercise our values through our interests. And finally, our values may shift. We have core fundamental values and secondary values that may shift during our lifetime. I mean, we have different life experiences that may steer us in different directions. So it's always important to ask ourselves the questions, what do I value now? Because surely 12-year-old Rubik's Cube solving Casey and 28-year-old Casey value different things. Right? I still like my Rubik's Cube, not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Same. I want to go back to what you kind of touched upon, which is a bit of imposter syndrome. So being not good enough or feeling that you're not good enough, and having this be a reason that people are putting off doing certain things. Some of the ways to get around it is, one, you mentioned just doing it. The other way that I really thought of, and I actually wanted to ask you if you thought it was the same way, is finding other people who have started this, finding their journeys, and then realizing that maybe at that stage they were not at the same level you were, and you can start as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I got into plants during the pandemic, and I started off, this is like 3 birthdays ago maybe, my brother gave me 2 plants, and they were small little sprouts. They're like maybe 1 inch or 2 inches tall. And as I continued to water and nurture and fertilize them, I had faith and trust that they would grow. I didn't really know how big they would grow, but I knew that they would grow. That's an example of having self-belief, or having belief in your abilities, in your ability to grow, ability to expand and learn, or in other words, having a growth mindset. I had this idea that this plant, if I continued to nurture it and gave it the right conditions to grow, it will grow. And I'm out here in the Amazon in Costa Rica, and there are plants that I plant at home that are just like so largely flourishing because they are in their home environment. So I share this story because the hardest plant that I tried to plant is an avocado. I'd go to the grocery store, eat the avocado, and I heard that it's possible to plant an avocado seed or place an avocado seed into regular tap water, and you let it sit for about a month, and it'll start to grow roots. And when it starts to grow roots, it'll start to sprout up, and you can plant it into soil and it'll grow. I planted about 10 of them, and 2 of them grew. The first 3 did not grow.
Nice.
They did not grow. And I was about to give up. Like, maybe it's just not warm enough in Vancouver for these avocado plants to grow. And had I continued to believe in that, it's the conditions, blaming the external environment, blaming I wasn't watering enough, blaming that, there wasn't enough, sun on the windowsill, is an example of us like bringing it back to relating to imposter syndrome of not believing that we could grow. And I relate the imposter syndrome with a fixed mindset, which is this assumption that we are static in our skill set, that we cannot grow, and that the cards that we were dealt are the cards that we could play with. Now, the growth mindset is we could go to the convenience store and grab another deck of cards and play more. We could actually print skills. We could develop skills. And I like to share this analogy because this one avocado plant is huge now. Like, it has flourished, but not every single one that I planted flourished. In fact, 80% of them died and rotted, and I threw away into the compost. Well, if 80% of the time I choose to believe in that mindset, I'm not going to grow. But if even that 20% chance of me believing in myself, or saying like, you know what, I don't have the skills to become a coach right now, but I'm going to try. And I did this after finishing 7 years of education in accounting, saying I'm going to restart because I don't see myself continuing down this accounting path anymore. I'm going to restart a new skill. And yes, I absolutely had doubts. I don't know how to coach. How could I be a life coach? I don't have enough life experience. I'm not old enough. All these excuses came up. And those are my excuses saying, well, this environment, I'm not good enough to serve others. And your question about just getting into action, I just needed to get into action. Because it's not confidence that I needed to get started. I just needed to get started. Confidence is the result of the actions and the risks that we take. Similar to you opening up and asking people to be a part of this podcast. We could have all these ideas of having an idea to start a podcast, and like, I don't have enough setup. Or what if the internet's not strong enough? Of course, like we had that issue today.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that we could actually keep on trying and growing that I think really sets people apart, leaders apart from those that are dreamers. And I definitely was a dreamer before. I still am. But I'm also learning how to take action and understand that the doubts of not being good enough often are internal mental barriers that we could overcome. Right? They're not real walls or brick walls in front of us. They're mental barriers that we could start to overcome because we are excellent problem solvers. If we have our eyes on a target, we could figure out a way to get there or find someone else that has done it already. Right? So I totally do agree. Surrounding myself with other coaches, with other entrepreneurs has been one of the best ways to eliminate that self-doubt. Because if, Johnny over there could do it, why can't I?
Exactly. And you brought up a great point, Casey, about confidence, because for me also confidence is a function of previous steps you've done and the results from those steps. So if you lack any sort of results from inaction and you think you're confident, you might be faking it and you might be able to do something with it. But until you really have some tangible results, whether that's internally for yourself to realize or maybe some people are validated by external confidence, I don't think that's true confidence. I think you do need to be constantly doing action and constantly getting results, whether that's failures or successes, to actually be more confident.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing you mentioned there that I really wanted to touch on is, so accounting is a particularly grueling profession. I have a lot of really close people to me that are accountants, so I've seen how hard they work, how many hours they put in, and a lot of them are not fulfilled. And I think a lot of them did go in because their parents told them to, or they thought this would be a good path to money. And really, the career ladder for accounting is so brutal, right? To go up and make manager, and then partner, and you have this like kind of this really steady staircase that's there for you. And there are people that thrive in it, but why? What is it about this profession in particular, you think, where I have seen a lot of people who do need help?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The profession itself is very regulated. And it's a very, very important service. Without accountants, specifically auditors, most likely the entire financial system would collapse because we would not have any trust in the reporting of our public companies and our government, because I've audited both public companies, governments, non-profits, and specifically for auditing professionals, we have to keep a very high attention to detail. We have to keep up with constantly changing regulations. And we also have to serve clients in a very seasonal manner. Typically during the wintertime in Canada, in the States at least, where we have hard deadlines that we need to meet. We have clients that are also trying to run their business, and let's face it, accounting isn't always the highest priority for businesses. It's very important to have clean accounting records, but business growth and development and taking care of company morale and all that, like especially during the pandemic. Yeah. So when we combine all these factors together, and the amount of training that it requires to become an accountant is high school education, a post-secondary degree, and another 2-3 years to become a professional designated accountant, at least here in Canada. You invest nearly the same amount of time as being a doctor, right? And when you have all this investment into your education, into your skill set, again, it's that sunk cost fallacy. It's like, okay, I've spent all this time developing my skill. Now, where can I bring myself in this profession? And it's usually, you want to think about going up, right? Developing more influence, more value as a leader of an organization. And it's a very challenging one because the work is always going to be there, and it's not very forgiving. I mean, the amount of effort that you put into the work for the year, you're going to do it, and then you're going to do it again and again and again and again. So typically what happens, specifically in professional services like public practice, is that people that are very good at what they do and enjoy what they do, they'll stay. And they'll make their way up that corporate ladder. In fact, I think around 2% of new accountants will actually make their way all the way up to becoming partner of the big accounting firms. And those that do not see themselves continuing down that path will likely find other pockets of the industry to jump into that are usually accounting or finance related. Now, why it's limiting and why it's challenging is it's similar work. It requires a lot of attention to detail, a lot of repetitiveness, and working, honestly, just the fact that we're sitting down and looking at our screens for 8-9 hours of the day in itself is very challenging, right? So the way that I look at career development, specifically for accountants and those that have studied a very hard skill, is it's very transferable. I mean, I don't practice accounting right now other than doing my own taxes and my own bookkeeping and financial projections. But I learned a lot of skills that have helped me in the business world outside of technical accounting. It's being able to talk numbers, understand how to analyze problems. And I'm thinking back at the Rubik's Cube. There are formulas and there are ways to solve problems. And I've learned how to solve problems as an accountant. And I think a really challenging part of the industry, being an accountant and being in other very analytical type professions like engineering, banking, finance, is that when we solve problems, we try to solve like our own personal problems or challenges. We try to use analysis and logic to make decisions. But like I said earlier, way earlier in the conversation, it's actually about listening to our intuition, our gut feeling, our reaction to the news, even things like that. And starting to stop, pause, slow down, and ask ourselves these self-awareness building questions. What's actually getting in my way right now, and what could I do today to solve that? Right? And for many people, the initial thought is, I need to make more money. But I don't know if that's actually the solution. Right? So a lot is happening in the industry right now. I'd say with the pandemic and the shifting way of working to fully remote has actually made things more variable. There's some employers that have adapted to fully remote work. There's some employers that are, you got to be back in the office. And now it comes down to people's, again, right at the beginning, people's nature and nurture and personality and values to determine, is this the industry that I want to continue building my career in? And it's not just accounting or accountants that are asking themselves these questions. It's a lot of these tech companies, nurses, lawyers, teachers, that this world is ever changing. And we always have to ask ourselves, well, today, what do I value? And what is it that I need to do or focus on to continue to live in alignment with what I value? Again, if we sit still and wait for something to happen, we end up procrastinating and drifting away from where we actually want to be.
Awesome. No, that's a great explanation of kind of everything that covers the field, and going back to value alignment. Seeking one other thing. So you've been traveling quite a bit recently. What are some of the lessons you've learned from your travel? And they could be, funny anecdotes or something really deep that you've learned recently from your travels.
Yeah, I learned that when I'm faced with real fear, like real fear, fight or flight or freeze reaction, that it's so in the moment. I always talk about fight, flight, or freeze with my clients. And typically when in stressful situations, we'll react in ways where we'll want to escape or retaliate, fight back, or we just freeze in the moment, right? And this might be something like your boss at 7:00 p.m., right when you're about to sign off, says, we need this report done by tomorrow morning. You're going to have to stay up and do it. And a fight, flight, or freeze, again, to a stress response, a threat, you'd be like, no, that's not what I want to do. I'm out of here. Or you just do it, right? I always talk about fight, flight, or freeze because skillfully, when faced with threats or environmental stimuli or people, fight, flight, or freeze is a reaction that is very evolutionary. Something we've developed in the face of real danger, like coming across a wild animal. Like they always use that saber-tooth tiger example. Like, what do? You either attack it or you run away or you freeze and you get eaten. But our brains cannot differentiate between those kind of threats today. And the reality is we're not actively chased by these wild animals today. And we could actually skillfully slow down our thinking, get in touch with what we're feeling in those moments, and ask ourselves, what would a skillful response be? What would a skillful response be? So going back to this example of your boss or manager asking you to work, is a skillful response would be, thanks for letting me know. Can you share with me a little bit more about what exactly needs to get done by tomorrow so I could prepare? I have plans tonight to go for dinner. Is there any way possible that we could push this? What's the minimum? Or, we use our communication to get what we need. And so your question, what have I learned, is we were walking through the forest. It was about 3 o'clock, 3:30, and it gets dark around 5. And this is at a national park. It's not paved at all. Like it's in the jungle. We had to walk through 3 different rivers to get to this waterfall, and like we're fully soaked at that point. And on the other side, earlier in the morning, we were on like the nicer, like more developed place that most of the tourists go to of the national park, which was really fine. There were beautiful flowers and everything. But we were walking towards this waterfall, and I started to hear these sounds in the bushes. And I looked ahead, I see this black figure. It's only myself and Serinda walking through the forest at the time, and I see this black figure, and I said, Serinda, like, I'm going to stop right now and ask you to take a breath, because I see something big up there that's black, and I'm not sure what it is. And it's moving. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I know there's wild animals out here, but I don't know which ones are dangerous, and I haven't yet seen it. It could either be a pig, it could be a monkey, it could be a jaguar, it could be a tapir, which is like this big mammal. I was like, okay, this is like one of the moments where I'm actually sinking into this fight, flight, or freeze. And meanwhile, Serinda's like, okay, what are we doing? She's like, I think there's someone behind us. I'm like, okay, good. We're not alone. We should be good. So I turn around and look. It's another one. They were these white-nosed peccari, which are wild boar, wild pigs, and we were surrounded by them. And I was like, I just tried to stay calm. But at the same time, my heart was racing. Serinda's heart was racing. Like, are these things going to attack us? We have no idea. We didn't get a briefing at the beginning of the tour or the beginning of the walk. And sure enough, there's about 6 of them all around us, and they're like stomping around, making all these sounds. But it's moments like those where I appreciate, because we did not know what was going to happen next, yet we were able to stay calm and collected, and just trust our own instincts. Right? Trust our own instincts. And sure enough, we were fine. They ended up scurrying off into the distance. And it makes for a good story, but also a lesson as well, that when we are faced with challenges and with danger, like, we could have reacted and freaked out. And maybe that would have worked and they would have ran away. Or maybe that might have scared them and they would have attacked us, especially if they had a cub or a piglet around. But as we start to adventure and experience different parts of the world, we're realizing that we're becoming more comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing. I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we wanted to take away from traveling, is being comfortable with not knowing. And yes, on the internet these days, we could almost find anything. There's so much information out there, and at the fingertips, we could Google what kind of animal that was. But in the moment, I did not have access to that infinite knowledge, and nor did I need infinite knowledge. What we needed was to listen and pause and trust ourselves. And that's this practice that we've been tuning into anywhere we're going while traveling around Central America, especially when we're out in nature. And I love it because it really challenges us to live in the moment and, make decisions, second by second, not have to plan everything in advance, and truly, take things as they come.
Nice. That's a great story. I'm glad you guys are both okay. One thing I wanted to ask you is actually regarding your content creation, because you've been, creating a lot of content, and I watched a bunch of your videos before this in preparation, and I can tell you're super authentic in them just from knowing you from before, which I think is super important. What's kind of been your learnings through creating content, and what might be some of the drawbacks? Because, they are naysayers when you start putting out a lot of content. Can you share some insights into that?
Yeah. What I think about content creation is it's a form of art. And, what's the purpose of art? Art is a way to communicate expression, whether that's a story, through movies or music or feelings. For me as a coach, I create a lot of content, and it's usually around storytelling. Challenges that I've faced throughout building my career, stories of other people that are building their careers. And it's always important to highlight the challenges as well. we're not perfect. We don't need to be perfect. And that by highlighting in this form of content creation nowadays on social media, it's really a form of art, storytelling, and sharing authenticity and vulnerability. And the way that I look at it, I like to share these stories for a few reasons. One, to showcase that especially for those people that are feeling stuck or unfulfilled or starting to think about some sort of change in their life, a transition in their life, that they're not alone. And by bringing together stories and sharing that we're all human, we don't have it all together, we're all trying to figure out what will work for us and what will not work for us, really brings the messaging and brings a transition more down to earth, that it's possible. You're not alone. And if you do feel like you want to make a change in your life, that you can rely on others or you can open yourself up to others, whether that's through coaching or therapy or going back to school. There's so many different pathways to collaborate with others. And honestly, it's been a challenge for me to differentiate, am I sharing truthfully and openly and authentically, or am I sharing something that I'm just sharing just to be seen? And it's such an important line to draw, to ask yourself, what is the actual value that you're delivering from this piece of content? Is it inspiration? Is it motivation? Is it education? Is it knowledge? And the drawbacks of it, I would say, like, the reason why I produce so much content is because there's so many ways to connect online nowadays. There's so many ways to connect online nowadays. And for me, building an internet-based business was very important for me to accommodate for the lifestyle that myself and Surnda have chose for ourselves. And as well... Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, I think there was just a bit of lag.
Okay, I don't see your video, but that's fine. I was saying as well, the opportunity through building an internet-based business is that it could scale, and you could share messages at a wider scale than in person, and that's the direction that the world's going. And I was honestly very resistant at the beginning to building an internet-based business, but when I started to really consider how else would I build a business through word of mouth or like paper marketing, it just wasn't feasible to me. Drawbacks are, there is so much information out there online, and people's attention span nowadays are like 1 or 2 seconds. So to get a message across to an audience, even if content is getting pushed out, like nowadays, especially with TikTok, people scroll really fast, Instagram scroll really fast, that it almost is now a game of grabbing people's attention. And the way that people do that now is through hooks. It's through, putting out these big claims or, sharing an image that catches people's attention. And it's kind of backwards of how I do my business, because with my business, I give space and time for my clients to articulate. And it is challenging for me to find that balance of being able to show what I can do as a coach, as a thinking partner, as an advisor, as a friend in such a short amount of time. So I do really appreciate being on this podcast, because in a time frame of under an hour, we could share stories and insights, and I could really showcase my values and what I stand for through this forum. And as well as you're going to be marketing and sharing this podcast, the big challenge is, well, how can we get it out to people that are interested in listening, that have 40 minutes of their day, or maybe even 20 minutes on double speed to sit down and listen to a conversation. And that's the challenge of today's digital age, is that there's so much content and information out there that we're all like, everyone's trying to compete. And I'm not just competing with other coaches, I'm competing against like Coca-Cola
Yeah.
showing up on screens. So yeah, it's definitely a very interesting space to be in right now. But I love these kind of conversations where we have the time and the space to really just slow down and have a very real conversation.
Yeah, though this is the format that I resonate with as well. just because you're able to get into a depth of understanding that short form you really can't. You can be pretty nuanced in short form as well, but it is tough. And awesome, Casey. So, like, kind of the last thing I like to ask everybody is, so do you have any questions for me before we wrap things up?
Yeah. Well, I have a ton of questions, but if I were to ask one question that stands out is what was your favorite part of this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or what stands out to you most?
I think I actually really liked your introduction where you went through your entire story and how things fell into place. And I think it felt really as a good indicator of what was to come in the rest of the conversation. And it got to me to really catch up with you personally because we haven't seen each other in a while. And I think that your intro story really gave me a chance to, take things back all the way back to, we started off with talking about high school and then to where you are now. So I felt more connected to you. And I think for me, that was the best part. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Awesome, Casey. Well, I think it's been a blast. Thanks so much for coming on again. So yeah, I'll go ahead and stop the recording and that should still run for a bit.